The civil rights movement is often celebrated as a victory for Black Americans, but for freedmen, descendants of enslaved Black people, it largely failed. While laws changed, economic and social justice remained out of reach, thanks in part to Black sellouts in leadership who prioritized personal gain over collective progress. Let's listen to intellectual speaker Dr. Claude Anderson speaking on these and much more.
About 1852, a lady named Harriet Beecher Stover wanted to write about it. So she then wrote about the whole thing. She interviewed a guy whose name was Henderson, what you all know as Uncle Tom. He then told about the story. She wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. But in that book, contrary to what most people think, Uncle Tom was not the bad guy. The bad guy was Sambo. And so I'm asking you all as my brothers and sisters, please in the future don't call a black guy who you know is worthless and trifling. Don't call him an Uncle Tom. That's complimenting him. Call him his real name, what he's entitled to, and that's a Sambo. Any black person sells his own people out and will do them in, he is a Sambo. Now, what is a Sambo again? Going back to Meritorious Manumission in 1710, the whole conditioning process, the whole brainwashing system, the whole social engineering system says that you must teach black people to see the world through the eyes of whites. You must see everything through their eyes. You must accept their values, their superiority, whatever they think and feel, and that way we got you contained. And that's why when you see somebody like Colin Powell running for office, they say, well, you can run for office if you see the things the way we want to see them. If you want to be conservative, you can run for office. If you want to place a lot of importance on abortion, you can run for office. If you want to talk about being anti-taxing, you can run for office, which means if you see things the way we see them as a black person, you're safe. You're acceptable. And if you don't want to do that way, then become an athlete or an entertainer. So therefore, don't you identify with the rest of those blacks in the country. You stay away from them. They're bad. And you start going out and you try to go get a penny out of an athlete and entertainer, do something for the black community. They're going to do it. Their advisors won't let them do it. The agents won't do it. Their promotion people won't let them do it. They're going to identify with your community because, again, they have now already died and gone to heaven. Okay, so when Harriet Beecher Stover put out her book, what she tried to tell black folk is that Uncle Tom was not a bad guy. See, Uncle Tom, if you read that book, and most blacks, 90% of blacks never read it. They always call another black, he's an Uncle Tom, he's an Uncle Tom. He's not an Uncle Tom. If you read the book Uncle Tom was a guy who would not beat black women. Uncle Tom in that book was a guy who would not beat other blacks to make them pick more cotton. Uncle Tom was a guy who would come in at night and take cotton out of his own bag and put it in other black folks' bags so they wouldn't get whippings at night. Uncle Tom was a guy who would not tell where black folk were hiding when they went across the river and they broke free as slaves. But Simon Legree, the white slave master, had a black that followed him around named Sambo, who always says, you show me, give me the right, I'll show you how to trees the coons. I'll show you where they hides. And see, and that's the guy. See, his role responsibility was going back to Meritorious Manumission. I told you about where you got to protect white folks' property and protect their wealth. He says, I will protect it and find it for you. And that's why you read in the movies and books that came out after Uncle Tom, you always had a black guy, a black slave, was running down the road saying, Master, master, here comes the army, let's hide our silver and gold. And you all say, our? How did it get to be our? You know, he always wants to say something that doesn't even belong to him. And that showed up all through history. And today you got the same kind of personality doing it. And now he's not saying let's hide our silver and gold. He's called himself a conservative. I'm also against affirmative action for black folk. I'm against quotas. I'm against preferential treatment. Even had one running around talking about he wanted to pass a law to stop black folk from discriminating against whites. You still got that kind of personality that always wants to protect something, protect the strong. You always got that kind of Sambo personality. And nowadays, the best way to get rich is to say, I'm going to protect that master's gold and silver, and I'm going to be against them black folk. I guarantee I can get you a radio talk show. I can get you a television show. I can even get you an appointment to the Supreme Court. Okay? You tell me how many black folk you want to sell out, and I guarantee I'll show you how to make money. Because you see, every ethnic group, every religious group, every racial group, every political group has always made money off of black folk. Okay? And what I'm going to start talking about in Powernomics when I come back here in the fall is to show you all one thing. I'm going to tell you time is up. You have made, as a race, you made every religion, every ethnic group, every racial group rich. There is nobody else left on earth to make rich but yourselves. So that's all left. We got to do it for ourselves now. So don't give me this stuff about Dr. Anderson. That's the reverse discrimination. We are anti. You ain't anti nobody. You already made everybody rich. They always tell me, well, Dr. Anderson, what you're preaching isn't that segregation? Or let me tell y'all something. Starting again, back in 1850, blacks got hung up on that same mess, you know. By 1850, after Harriet Beecher Stover put out her book, here comes Frederick Douglass. He's going to take one path. He's going to go back now and try to pick up becoming an integrationist. He becomes an integrationist, picking that he wants. Well, since they excluded us in 1638, saying we should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society, let's be integrationists and civil rights people. Let's make them let us in. So they started that top strand called integrationists, which run Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, then up to all your civil rights leaders and Martin Luther King and that whole group, all the way down the line to even your present-day civil rights groups. They keep saying, we want access to whatever you own. We want to be included in whatever you own. Now you got another group that started after the book with Harriet Beecher Stover. They said they want to be segregationists. Then you got the more strongly willed persons like W.B. Du Bois. Then you got Martin Delany. You got Marcus Garvey. Then you got Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. They were going the other way saying, no, we want our separate stuff. Now, what I say by myself, and I know a lot of people might get upset when I say it, both groups were right and both groups were wrong. What I say is that it is not about integration. The issue is not segregation. The issue is congregation. It means aggregating. What it is called functional pluralism, which means we are not trying to integrate, we're not trying to segregate. No other group comes here and says, I want to integrate or segregate. What they're saying is that if I come together and concentrate as a people, concentrate my power and my wealth and my resources, I can compete. That's what they're talking about. And please, since I love all of you all, and I'm going to move here with you, don't let them trick you all anymore with them upside down glasses. They used to ask me that during the integration about Dr. Anderson. Now, hold it. Now, you're at the governor's office in Florida. You represent the whole state in education. Now, what do you want during integration? You got Malcolm X talking about segregation. You got Martin Luther King talking about integration. Why don't you all make up your mind? Which do you want? I said, I don't want either one. I want the same rights and privileges that everybody else got to go to either one of the sticks. Don't try to put me on one end of the stick. What I want more than anything else is to bring my people together and say, get all the power and wealth together like everybody else. And that way, quit trying to try to define us. You see, every Asian, for instance, when he leaves his homeland, he comes to America. He looks in the mirror and says, I'm going to America. And when I get to America, I'm going to find me a community of people that either look like me, or I'm going to build me a community of people that look like me, that have my values, my culture, and my language, Nobody asked him about integration or segregation. When Hispanics come to this country, they would say, I'm going in, I'm going to build me a community of people that look like me or sound like me. And like the Asians who set up little Havanas, who set up little Cambodias, little Vietnam, Chinatowns in every city. The Hispanics come in, they'll build little Mexicos, little Havanas, little Hialeahs. I can go across America and find German towns, French towns, Greek towns, Polish towns, but I can't find a black town. Because of our inappropriate behavior pattern with the Rodney, we keep trying to integrate. Nobody else is trying to integrate. Why would you try to integrate? And I just told you in 1790, the law says in the Constitution that the majority will win and the minority will lose. If the majority will win and the minority will lose, why would you ever do anything that breaks yourself into smaller pieces when you already a plan systematically program the minority? Now you got other people in a category called minority. You got women, gay, Hispanic, anything you want. Midgets, Hispanics, anything you want. But nobody goes by there and say how many you can have. You've ever heard anybody say we can only have so many women in the country, or so many midgets in the country, or so many gay in the country, or so many the only thing they say is you must have is so many blacks. We're the only people. And see, and another thing you got to understand, I told you last time I was here, is that you got to remember that you are the only non-immigrants in America. The only non-immigrants. So when you start using a word for yourself, always call yourself a non-immigrant. Don't call yourself anything else other than that. Don't call yourself a minority. And to some degree, if you really want to be slick, I would even call myself an African American. Why not? I asked one girl in Texas, she said, I noticed you never call yourself an African American. She said, I said, why is that? I said, because I'm black. You see? She said, but why? But are you still an African American? I said, no. Because you see, when I go look at the definition of African American, the whole north part of Africa is a continent. That's not a country, that's a continent. People coming in from El Salvador, and they're El Salvadorians. When you say you're from Africa, I'm an African. Where in Africa? Do y'all understand what I'm saying? Where in Africa? And plus that, and worse than that, is that the whole north part of Africa, those coming in the country, they are Arabs, Palestinians, Chaldeans, Egyptians. They are classified, those are whites coming in, but they also call themselves African Americans. When I go down through different parts of the west coast of Africa, I got people coming in from west coast of Africa. They are Pakistanis and Indians, East Indians, but they call themselves African Americans. When I go down to whites coming in from South Africa, they call themselves African Americans. And what they've done again is smother the issue over. So when I go break it open, it's like cracking open an egg. Like when I look inside the word minority, I look inside of African American. I find the number of blacks that came into the country last year, out of 26,000 African Americans, I only find something like 4,000 blacks. And that's why they're going to put the moves on you again. What they want to do is to cover it up again so you can't figure out what's happening to black folks. So new term, they're going to say, well, we buried a lot of them under minorities, that concept. We buried a lot of them under the term Afro-American. Now let's come up with another term called multicultural. And Asian or Asia-Rasian or something, nobody know what they are anymore. And see, if we bury them, nobody know what the conditions are for them anymore. They can't figure it out either. And see, that way we lock in the structural inequities. If racism, slavery, and Jim Crowism made whites 50-foot giants, and your problem is that whites got this much, you got that much, if you bury everything and smother it over, you'll never figure it out. You all going to have to fight from now on to make sure that it's only black. Every issue is black, so you can find out what's happening to your people. They're going to try to bury it because whites now got a choice. Either correct the structural inequities or hide it. And it's much cheaper to hide it. And one of the easiest way of hiding it is to co-opt your leadership. To pay off the black leadership and bring them inside the circle, and they're not going to make issues over anything. Instead of functioning on as I said, your problem is the structural inequities. The structural inequities are so bad in America. and they have been so bad since slavery, that that civil rights and integration can't even reach black folk. They're so badly damaged and hurt. And I don't know why the blacks keep running around talking about we want civil rights and equality. You can't get equality if you're unequal. Unless, again, they put those glasses on you and turn them upside down, and all of a sudden you begin to see unequal as being equal. The worst kind of racism is the racism that pretends that unequals are equals. And that's what they've done to you. They got this whole new concept called a colorblind society. And what colorblind society means, let's be blind to black folk, pretend we don't see them. And they're hiding and smothering it again for you. And that's what it means. Now, where did that come from? It came from some of the white civil rights think tanks out of Washington. After the civil rights movement, what they wanted to do was say, let's bury the issue with black folk. And they gave our civil rights leaders a chance after the civil rights movement to make the difference. They didn't take it. Our black leadership displayed inappropriate behavior coming out of the civil rights movement. Throughout the civil rights movement, when they should have been focusing on the real issue, they didn't do it. Instead of focusing on correcting the historical damage that had been inflicted on black folk, they started messing around with civil rights and integration and never touched the problem. Ran all over the country, thinking that by taking down the signs over the water fountains or the bathrooms about colored only or black only, that they were dealing with racism. They didn't even touch racism. Racism was 3 stories down. Getting a black folk to sit in a white restaurant or sit on the front of a bus has no meaning at all. The second thing they did was they never had a plan. They ran all over the country from one demonstration, one march to the next one, never had a national plan about what they're going to do when they get there and what the next generation of blacks are going to do. And thirdly, they never built an institution to carry out a national plan. And when they did that, whites then changed their policy on blacks. They figured out black folk have displayed as inappropriate behavior and missed the boat. So what they did then, they said, let's put the moves on them. Johnson then wrote a law saying you got to correct the conditions of black folk in 1965, what's called the Affirmative Action Bill. When that came out, they put the moves on us to smother the issue again. Affirmative action was supposed to have been intended to correct those structural inequities between blacks and whites that have occurred as a direct result of all those years of things I'm talking about. As soon as the bill came out, whites immediately started changing it and black leadership bought it. The issue was supposed to be going this way. Watch how they flip the glasses upside down on you. The issue was supposed to be correcting historical what has happened to blacks historically by racism and discrimination. They switched and said, let's not talk about historical, let's talk about present day and the future. You're supposed to have been dealing with racism, which means group-based. They said, no, forget about that. Let's deal with individual discrimination. The issue was supposed to have been focusing on dealing with things that have happened to black folk. They changed it. No, let's deal with issues pertaining to everybody. Women, gays, handicapped, everything else. And when they did that, they destroyed affirmative action. Don't even waste your time even chasing affirmative action anymore. It's been destroyed. It was supposed to be helping black folk. Now, what the other groups did, they said, now that somebody put out a law to help black folk, how do we become equal to blacks? And that's when the Hispanics jumped up with this thing called Hispanic, the concept. Before that, we didn't have anything called Hispanic. But they thought in the early 60s that black folk might get some out of the civil rights movement. So what they did, they went to the table and came up with a whole term called Hispanic. They said, let's go all over the world and find everybody that speaks Spanish and pretend they're equal to black folk. And let's pretend that the Spanish language has been handicapped, Jim Crowed, enslaved, hung, lynched, decapitated, and everything else, and therefore is entitled to be treated like a black person. And they fabricated a new race called Hispanics. So now that means any person coming from Spain, Portugal, Philippines, any place, say, I'm a Hispanic, I'm equal to black folk. And the worst part about it, and then every time you hear a report about poverty, they'll go compare Hispanic poverty with black poverty. Nobody ever stops and hold a second. You got to quit playing that game. You're smothering the issue. The poverty on black folk is poverty that's been there for 400 years. That's the same old poverty you've been dealing with for 400 years, and you got rolling poverty. You keep having Hispanics coming into the country and comparing the poverty they're bringing into this country with the poverty that's been with black folk for 400 years. Nobody wants to stop them from doing that. Now people say, well, they got poverty. Yes, but that's poverty they bring in here with them. Black folk didn't bring poverty with them. It was given to us as a gift. If you were to go back to 1840s, where I was earlier talking about Uncle Tomism, back at that point in time, you did not have one single solitary Hispanic in the entire United States. But you had almost 5.5 million black folk that were enslaved, who had been enslaved for 250 years. You didn't have any Hispanics. By 1900, you had 100,000 Hispanics in the United States, but you got 11 million black folk. Now they got the same identical birth rate in 1900 up until today. Same identical birth rate. You got 100,000 Hispanics and 11 million black folk, and now they're going to pass black folk. Now somebody who can count past 3 should say, hold a second. How can you only have 100,000 of them in 1900 at the same birth rate, and you got 11 million blacks and now passing blacks? Because 2 million every year walking across the border. It is not this country's responsibility to be correcting all their poverty. It is the country's responsibility to correct the poverty they put on people. The poverty, and see, if you go through history, you cannot find one single solitary instance where anybody else in this country have been denied access to the educational system, to the economic system, to the political system, to the social system, but black folk. Don't you let anybody compare themselves with you. And that's why I said a few minutes ago, use terms that isolate you and reconnect you with your history and give you a special uniqueness so that nobody can piggyback off of you. Use the word non-immigrant. If you're going to do wrong right. If you want to insist, for those in the audience who want to insist on using the word minority, then at least qualify and say we're the only involuntary minority, or we're the only planned minority. But don't use this term where it means everybody collectively, because the whole concept of minority means to confuse the issue and defuse any resources you could have gotten. Now, where does that come from as a minority? Let's deal with that concept a second. Now, at this point in time, black people have to understand in America that if you go back to the Constitution I was talking to you about earlier, the Federalist Papers were the document upon which the Constitution was drafted. The Federalist Papers said this, that if you're going to have a social democracy where the rule is that the majority will win and the minority will lose, then the majority has some obligations. First of all, if you use that social democracy that we're currently using, the majority have these obligations. One, it is the majority's responsibility to protect the rights of the minority. It is not your right as a minority to keep going out here marching and demonstrating. It is the dominant white society to make sure you got everything you need. That's their obligation. Point 2 in the Federalist Papers that gave the structure for the Constitution, it also says that if you use a social democracy like we have in the United States, that you cannot do anything to stop the minority from becoming the majority. And immediately after that Constitution went into effect, within a year, they enacted the immigration law to put a zero quota on blacks to make sure they stay a minority. They violated the Constitution in 1 year to make sure that you become a permanent minority. And I have not heard one black legal scholar in the United States make that an issue. None of them made it an issue. That's inappropriate behavior on the part of our legal scholars in this country. And thirdly, in the Federalist Paper, it says, and if you fail to protect, the majority fails to protect the rights of the minority, and if you do something to impede the minority from becoming the majority the same way you became the majority, then thirdly, that minority has no rights to abide by your laws and your rulings. Now think about that. Now I want to know where all my black scholars and my black legal minds, why aren't you displaying appropriate behavior and investigating that, find out why it is that you got the minority running around trying to protect itself when you know good and well it doesn't have the power and resources to do it. That's like trying to have a baby to look out for himself when you know he cannot go out and work a job and fix his own food. It's your obligation to take care of him. But nobody raised it as an issue in this country. Where all my black legal scholars should be raising issues over the fact that in this country, that the 13th Amendment that was given to black folk, that was supposed to free black folk, was never enforced. The Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to free blacks. That's what they say in the myth. But it wasn't. The Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln was only to free those blacks that he had no authority over in the first place. He was talking about the blacks who are any black who's in a state that broke away from the United States, you're free. He doesn't have that authority, just broke away. Now, the blacks he could have freed that was still in slavery on the north side, he didn't do anything about them. To this day, they never corrected that. So legitimately, they are still enslaved. Secondly, if you put out the 13th Amendment, freeing people, let's go to the 14th Amendment. If you go to the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment saying they hereby, forbade any kind of involuntary servitude. Then they stuck a clause in there, except when duly have been prosecuted and charged. You know what that means? What that meant was then that any white in the South who wanted to re-enslave black folk, all they had to do was come up with a charge and he can re-enslave you. And what the South did immediately after the 14th Amendment went into process, they passed what's called a Black Codes in 1865 and 66. The Black Codes then said that any black person who used to be a slave, who's now free, he must be able to show me he has a contract for employment in his hand by the 1st of January. Or therefore I can arrest you and charge you with vagrancy and put you back into a plantation and slave you again. Now, all the people knew that. They didn't raise any cane about it. Today, that's still a part of our Constitution. I don't hear my black scholars. Where's the appropriate behavior? Now, why is that important now when I talk about appropriate behavior? Because now there's a bill on the Hill where some white conservatives now want to lay claim to the 14th Amendment and say they're going to write a law called Equal Opportunity Act. What they're going to say now is that bill can be used for whites too, so that you can now not infringe on their rights. And what black folks should have done is gone back to the slaughterhouse case in 1872, which says that the 14th Amendment was strictly written for black people. That's what, in other words, whites are using the 14th Amendment for reverse discrimination charges against black folk. Now, you all follow me through on this. How can you allow somebody, if something is written on this side to help save you from this guy, how can you let him take the same law and knock your brains out on the other side with it? Am I losing you all on this now? So how can whites come around now and claim use of the 14th Amendment that was written to protect black folk from whites? And now whites are taking it and use it to hit blacks with it. Where are my black lawyers and judges? And you got a black sitting on the Supreme Court now, it keeps ruling, talking about he's a constitutional authority based on the Constitution. I'm just telling you, the Constitution is knocking our brains out. I don't need no more Constitution. But all these questions need to be raised in our court system about what's happening to us. And nobody's doing that. So in the bottom line, what I'm saying to you is that we got major problems in society, but we keep doing all these things wrong. We are poor and impoverished because we don't build communities, as I told you a few minutes ago. Secondly, we are the richest nation on earth outside of the United States as black folk. In the world, we are the 9th richest nation on earth. We got an annual disposable income of $382 billion. But we violate all the norms of economics as black folk. That's inappropriate behavior. Your money is supposed to bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves your community. I'm going to say that again. Black money is supposed to bounce 8 to 12 times. That means it must go through at least 8 to 12 black hands before it gets out of the Crenshaw neighborhood. 8 to 12 times. And it doesn't. Black money does not bounce one time. As soon as a black person gets paid, he's got this inexcusable denial in his mind, saying, as soon as I get paid, I'm going to run over every other black and get into the suburbs to spend it in a white store, in a white mall. And the Jews, on the other hand, their money bounced 18 times before it leaves their community. You look at the discrepancy between one bouncing not once and one's bouncing 18 times. Black people right now spend 95% of their money outside of their own communities. They spend 5% in their communities. In their communities, they spend 3% of that with non-black owned businesses. Black folk try to live off of 2% of their disposable income. They keep 2% every year. Then they take that 2% and put it into a savings account, a bank, and then they can't even get a loan from the white bank they put it into. Now, anybody in his right mind knows that it's humanly impossible for you to live off of 2% of your income. It can't be done, but we keep trying to do the impossible. Why do we keep trying to live off of 2% and you know it can't be done? So what happens then is every night, every black community in America goes bankrupt when the last non-black in a black community closes up the store, cleans out the cash register, and goes home. We go bankrupt from that night until the next morning. And the reason we're doing that, the reason we're so impoverished, is because other groups are also boycotting us. We don't have any business structures in our neighborhoods because others are boycotting you. As long as you live, you'll never see a white person because his money is bouncing in his own community. So he's not going to let his money bounce in your community. So when he gets money, he keeps it. You don't see him getting in his car on a Saturday morning, like this morning, driving down to a black neighborhood, getting out of his car, going into a black store, buying a black-made product. He doesn't do that. If he does do that, I told y'all before, take a picture of it if you see it. It might be very valuable one day. Every black I know tries to get into Chinatown every Friday and Saturday evening. Have you ever seen Chinese trying to get into a black neighborhood to buy anything? Then why do you keep doing it? Inappropriate behavior. You keep doing everything inappropriately, backwards. You got to quit doing it. I'm not telling you to be mean against anybody. I'm not telling you to be against them. I'm saying take care of your own people. Don't do what they're doing in slavery. And an instance of that, let me jump back into history again. On the eve of the Civil War, we had over 6,200 blacks in America that owned other slaves. 6,200 blacks were slave owners. Now, let me break that down a little more specific for if you don't understand what I'm talking about, not looking out for your own people, inappropriate behavior. Same thing out of Africa. They never changed all these things, still doing the same thing in this brainwashing, seeing things upside down. In New Orleans, for instance, I only had 842 blacks in the city at the time. And out of the 842, 612 of them owned slaves. Because they thought they were of a different color. They called themselves Creole and mulatto, so they wouldn't enslave the rest of their people. And when blacks tried to break free in New Orleans, out in the parish, the Jefferson Parish, the blacks went and joined the whites to put down a black revolt. And not only did they put it down, they helped slaughter the blacks. They chopped our heads off and put a head on a pole or something like every 100 yards, all leading all the way into New Orleans. That's inappropriate behavior of our people. Keep doing it in your own people. And then trying to find justifiable reasons. When the day you do the same thing, it's inappropriate behavior, same kind of behavior pattern, you're still killing your people. When I ask, why don't you go to a black store and spend your money at a black store? They said, Doctor, I want to go to the store. I don't want to go to the store. Why? I say, well, he sells it costs too much. He charges more than the guy 3 doors down. I said, who's the guy 3 doors down? Well, he's Chinese. I said, who's the guy? Well, he's black. See, that's inappropriate behavior because they don't understand what we call cost-benefit analysis, which means where are you getting the greatest benefit? Where do you get the greatest benefit for your race and your people and your money? If you go spend $1 with a black here and you go spend $1 with a white, and the white or the Chinese takes it out of his community and uses it against you. At some point, somebody's got to be home upstairs. You got to say, yes, it might cost me a few pennies more to buy from a black, but I get more in return. Particularly if I can get him to keep that money in his neighborhood and spend it with another black person. They said, well, what if his merchandise is bad? And you go down there and tell him. You go down there and tell him, let me tell you something. You got 6 months to clean up this place. You got 6 months to put in a better quality product. You got 6 months to start putting up better security and lighting in here. And you got 6 months to change your negative attitude. And hold him accountable. We must have an accountability system for our merchants and say, you got a responsibility. Now, I just got back from Detroit, Michigan last week, and my mother is old now and sort of senile, and my sister is also got some handicapping problems. She went down and bought a ham. And in Detroit, Michigan, almost all your key essentials are owned by whites, by Arabs, your gas station, your food stores. She showed me a ham she was going to fix that day. And she said, this doesn't look right. She said, will you take a look at it for me? I looked at it, and it had that slime on it. I said, where'd you get that? She said, I got it from Savon's Arab store down the street there where they sell the groceries. And I'd already looked in it, and I could smell the rotten meat when I come in the store. And it's all the stores in the city, because they're not black-owned stores. I said, cut that ham open, let me see it. She cut the ham open, and you can almost see the pus oozing out of it. And said, I'm going back on the radio in about 2 days back in Detroit. I'm going to ask every black in that city to close down all those darn stores. They got to quit doing that to black folk. And they go over and buy old vegetables from the main supermarket and bring them to the black neighborhoods. And I said, some black leadership, and this city has got a black mayor, a black city council, a black chief of police, a black school superintendent, a black mayor. How can you let people sell your people? Like my mother, an 80-year-old woman, sell her infested rotten meat with maggots in it. Inappropriate behavior. And they keep saying, well, Dr. Adams, we're electing the blacks, they're going downtown, they're representing, then pull them out of office. You get people out of office, don't support anybody in your community that won't support you in the black community. I don't care what color he is. Pull them out of office. How do you pull them off? You pull them out of office through accountability, recalls, and if you can't get to them, boycott whoever puts them in office. We got to get wealth and power as quick as we can if we're going to survive. The time is running out. We need money. We don't need jobs, we need money. And in conclusion, there's one lady told me, she said, Dr. Adams, she said, I love everything you say, but you got to quit talking about money all the time. I said, why? She said, because money is not everything. So I said, tell me what money is not. She said, well, money can't buy you love. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, without finance, it won't be any romance. She said, you know, you can make all those smart statements you want. I tell you what, I bet you money won't take you to heaven. I said, I tell you what, you let money take me as far as it can, I'll get off and walk the rest of the way.
During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black Americans built thriving economic institutions, including banks, insurance companies, and commercial hubs such as Tulsa's Black Wall Street, Durham's Haiti District, and Richmond's Jackson Ward. These self-sufficient Black economies provided jobs, generational wealth, and a sense of communal pride. However, integration led to the decline of Black-owned businesses as freedmen Black Americans sought acceptance in white-owned establishments. With newfound access to previously segregated spaces, many Black consumers abandoned Black businesses, leading to widespread closures. Meanwhile, Black entrepreneurs faced discrimination in securing loans and maintaining businesses in the face of economic integration, which ultimately favored white and non-Black businesses. Today, non-Black immigrant communities, including Arabs, Asians, and Hispanics, have capitalized on this economic shift, establishing businesses in historically Black neighborhoods. Instead of reinvesting in their own community, freedmen Black Americans spend a disproportionate amount of money in businesses owned by these groups, further eroding Black economic self-sufficiency. Prior to integration, Black Americans fostered a strong sense of unity rooted in shared experiences, struggles, and aspirations. Black communities developed their own educational institutions, religious organizations, and social structures that upheld cultural pride and resilience. Integration, however, weakened these bonds as freedmen Black Americans were encouraged to assimilate into mainstream society. This shift led to the gradual loss of traditional values, practices, and the prioritization of Black interests. As new immigrant groups entered the economic and political landscape, freedmen Black Americans found themselves competing for resources and representation rather than standing united. The prioritization of multiculturalism over Black self-determination further diluted Black political power and economic influence. The arrival of new immigrant groups has had a profound impact on freedmen Black Americans' economic prospects. Many immigrants have been able to access government and private resources that were originally fought for by Black civil rights leaders. Programs intended to benefit the descendants of enslaved Black Americans have often been extended to all minority groups, diluting the intended impact on freedmen communities. Additionally, immigrant business owners often do not hire Black employees, further restricting economic opportunities. Many of these businesses extract wealth from Black neighborhoods without reinvesting in the community, leading to further economic stagnation. The competitive labor market has also seen Black Americans losing jobs to lower-wage immigrant workers, exacerbating economic struggles and unemployment rates within Black communities. They downplay Jim Crow as a temporary setback rather than a systemic effort to maintain racial hierarchy. The truth is, America was not built on freedom. It was built on conquest and white supremacy, a reality it has never fully abandoned. This is why there is such a desperate push to erase or distort history. When people learn the full truth, they begin to see patterns that expose how injustice has evolved rather than disappeared. The backlash against so-called critical race theory is not about education. It is about control. From book bans to rewriting school curricula, efforts to suppress history are designed to keep people uninformed and unquestioning. White supremacy is ingrained in American institutions: home, school, religion, and politics. And those who fear history reveal their own guilt. They know that an honest telling of America's past would destroy the illusion of innocence. It happened when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. It happened when the brutality of Jim Crow was exposed. It happened when the Southern strategy was unmasked as a tool of racial control rather than democracy. The systems of oppression never disappeared. They evolved. Slave patrols became modern policing. Redlining became housing discrimination. The plantation became the prison. And through it all, America has attempted to erase its crimes. Native lands were stolen through laws. Black freedmen Americans were denied land and wealth-building opportunities. Immigration policies were designed to maintain a white majority. When Black communities thrived, they were targeted by mobs, by bombings, and by policies disguised as justice. It was not enough to take lives. They had to erase entire communities. Highways were built through Black neighborhoods. COINTELPRO was used to assassinate Black leaders. Confederate statues were erected not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement as a message of intimidation. And still, they expect us to believe in their version of America, one where slavery was just an unfortunate chapter, where the Tuskegee experiment is a footnote, where mass incarceration is an accident. But the truth cannot be erased. The real fear is not history itself. It is the reckoning that comes when people realize they have been lied to. A generation that understands the depth of deception will not trust blindly. And when trust is broken, people begin to question everything. That is what America fears most, not its past, but the consequences of its lies. And no matter how many books they ban, how many voices they silence, how many distortions they spread, the truth remains. It spreads like fire, igniting minds and demanding accountability. The real question is not whether America will face its past. The question is whether America can survive what it has done. The fight to suppress history is not just about the past, it's about controlling the future. Look at the policies still in place today. Voter suppression laws disproportionately target Black communities, just as literacy tests and poll taxes once did. The school-to-prison pipeline funnels black children into a system designed to break them before they can build. Discriminatory banking practices, like higher interest rates for black borrowers, continue the legacy of redlining. These aren't relics of history. They are present-day realities. And when we fight back, they criminalize us. The same government that calls Martin Luther King Jr. a national hero today labeled him the most dangerous man in America when he was alive. The same system that praises the civil rights movement now has laws banning protests that challenge police violence. The same corporations that post Black History Month ads are the ones funding politicians who strip black voting rights. They want us to forget. They want us to believe that history is behind us. But it isn't. Because the forces that upheld slavery, segregation, and racial violence are still at work, just under different names. The past is not dead. It is still shaping the present. And until we confront that truth, history will continue to repeat. The solution to these systemic issues lies in a conscious effort to rebuild Black economic independence, cultural unity, and family structure. Key strategies include: Black Americans must prioritize supporting Black-owned businesses, spending within their own community, creating a sustainable economic cycle similar to those in other racial and ethnic groups. Initiatives such as group economics, cooperative economics, and Black business directories can help redirect resources back into Black communities. Freedmen, Black Americans have to get back to strengthening Black families. The Black family unit has historically been a source of strength and resilience. Rebuilding strong familial structures through mentorship, education, and economic support can provide a foundation for generational wealth and stability. Also, teaching future generations on the importance of cultural identity, such as promoting Black history, traditions, and self-determination through community-based institutions, media, and social movements will help reinforce a sense of identity and pride. Last but not least, political and economic advocacy is a must. Freedmen, Black Americans must advocate for policies that specifically benefit their community, rather than broadly applied initiatives that dilute their impact. This includes pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic incentives tailored to descendants of enslaved Black Americans. So yeah, integration was intended to supposedly provide Black Americans with equal opportunities, but in many ways, it disrupted the economic and cultural self-sufficiency of freedmen, Black Americans. By prioritizing Black economic empowerment, cultural identity, and family unity, freedmen Black Americans can reclaim their lost progress and build a future of collective prosperity. The time has come to reinvest in our own communities and redefine success on our own terms. The civil rights movement is often hailed as a victory, a moment in history where America finally made good on its promises of equality. But for freedmen, descendants of enslaved Black Americans, it was anything but a victory. In many ways, the movement left us worse off, thanks to a combination of leadership betrayals, failed policies, and deceptive labels that diluted our struggle. One of the biggest failures of the movement was the emergence of Black leaders who prioritized their own political and financial gain over the needs of the freedmen community. Many of these so-called leaders compromised with white institutions in exchange for personal access to wealth and political influence. They embraced superficial integration while ignoring the long-term economic and social impact on Black communities. Rather than pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic self-sufficiency, they settled for token positions in white-dominated spaces, leaving the masses behind. Affirmative action was another policy that was supposed to uplift Black Americans, but in practice, it disproportionately benefited white women and non-Black immigrants. Instead of addressing the specific injustices faced by freedmen, these policies became a catch-all for any marginalized group, diluting the intended impact. White women became the largest beneficiaries, securing jobs and educational opportunities that should have gone to freedmen. Meanwhile, Black immigrants, who had not suffered from American slavery and segregation, were lumped into the same category as freedmen, further pushing us to the margins. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of the civil rights movement was the introduction of minority and multicultural labels. These terms blurred the lines between the unique struggle of freedmen and the experiences of other racial and ethnic groups. Policies that were meant to address the oppression of freedmen were opened up to anyone who wasn't white, turning the fight for black justice into a general diversity initiative. Corporations, universities, and the government all embrace diversity as a way to appear progressive while avoiding direct investments in the freedmen community. The fight for reparations was diluted into broader social justice causes that often left Black Americans without targeted benefits. The result? Our unemployment rates remain high, our wealth gap has barely improved, and the systemic barriers that were supposed to be dismantled still stand firm. One of the most urgent needs in the Black community today is the presence of strong legal minds who can fight for true justice. We need more attorneys and strategists like Thurgood Marshall and Johnny Cochran, visionaries who understood that real power comes from mastering the legal system and using it to advance the interests of freedmen. We must establish think tanks that bring together legal experts, economists, and policy strategists to create a unified agenda for economic and legal justice. These groups must push for reparations, fair housing policies, and legal protections against discrimination that specifically target the issues facing freedmen. Without a dedicated legal and economic strategy, we will continue to see our demands ignored and our communities left behind. The battle is not just in the streets. It must be fought in the courts, in boardrooms, and in legislative chambers where real change is made. If we are to correct the failures of the civil rights movement, we must first acknowledge them. We must push back against the leaders who sell us out for personal gain. We must rebuild Black economic power by supporting our own businesses and institutions. Most importantly, we must reject blanket policies that treat all minorities the same and demand reparations and policies specifically for freedmen Black Americans. The time for symbolic victories is over. It's time for real, tangible justice. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.